It's Friday, September 12th, and our current weather pattern is going to bring more severe weather today. And we have two isolated areas of severe weather that we're expecting to see today. Both are marginal risk of severe weather. One is going to be down here in parts of the Four Corner states, and our other one is going to be up here in the northern plains. Both are expected to primarily bring that threat of damaging winds. Here is the outlook for that. Only a 5% of both of these areas, so really only seen some 60-mile-an-hour damaging winds. However, up here in the northern plains, I think there could potentially be a probability for some 70-mile-an-hour damaging winds. And the same thing is going to go for hail, except that risk down here in parts of the Four Corners states is not going to really exist at all. And it's going to entirely be up here in the northern plains. I do think we could potentially see some large hail with the discrete mode that we could potentially see today. So definitely some 1.5 to 2 inch in diameter hail possible. And I think the northern plains is actually by far going to be the higher risk area of the two today. Here we can see that by around midday, we're going to start to see some discrete storms fire off, which means that they have a higher probability to reduce all hazards of severe weather. Now we're actually going to have two distinct clusters, or at least that's what the HRRR is predicting. We're going to have one north of a cold front and then one kind of sitting along the cold front, if not maybe a little bit south. But at first, it looks like both of these storm clusters are going to be a little bit behind the cold front. So this means a couple of things. These storms are likely to be more higher based, which would mean that they would exclusively produce this threat of some potentially large hail and isolated damaging winds. That hail could be 2 inches in diameter, and those winds could be up to 70 miles an hour. But as we go later into the day, we'll see that our storms north of the cold front will be the first to diminish, and then our ones on the cold front, if not maybe just a little bit in front of it, will actually start to prosper. I think we could potentially see a tornado threat evolve with this. Although that threat isn't super high, I think we could definitely see a weak tornado or two. Then, of course, that threat of damaging winds and hail would still exist, with it likely maximizing when these storms become disorganized and outflowy. Now, there is one more area I do want to talk about, which is kind of in the same region, but it's a little bit more east. It's going to be out here in the eastern Dakotas and then Minnesota. This is the remnants from yesterday's system pushing through, and it looks like it's just going to be outflowy and really a disorganized rainy mess. So any severe weather out of that, possibly a isolated risk for some damaging winds, but that's looking really unlikely. But still expect some gusty winds and a lot of rain if you're over here in western Minnesota. And then moving down south to our secondary risk, I think it's pretty much entirely conditional. I don't really see much severe weather going on here at all today, but there is definitely still the small potential for it starting around midday, going really all the way into the late afternoon hours. And that's mostly just going to be because we have this trough pushing through, bringing a lot of organizing shear and its moist stuff out here to possibly see a couple of organized storm clusters bring that very small threat for some hail, and then definitely a threat for some 60-mile-an-hour damaging winds. And the shear out here is also not terrible. I think the threat of a tornado or two is not off the table, although that threat is going to be pretty close to zero because this storm mode is going to be very messy. And then here is a better look at that big trough pushing through over the west, really being the main cause of all of our severe weather today. We can see that in our secondary risk of severe weather down here in the Four Corner states, we see quite a bit more flow, providing quite a bit more forcing and, of course, more organizational shear. Then we see up here in our northern plains risk area, we really see a lack of flow, maybe a couple of subtle short waves, just enough to touch off some storms, but nothing crazy. And that's actually one of the reasons why we're seeing a discrete mode instead of a linear mode, because there's really not that much forcing going on, but there's definitely still enough to get some storms going. And we see this pretty decent ridge over parts of the plains of Mississippi River Valley. And then we see kind of this trough dip back down into parts of Florida. That's why we could see quite a bit of rain in Florida today as well. And speaking of rain, most of the time the past week, we've been seeing a pretty constant slight risk of some flash flooding down here in the Miami region for some 2 to 4 inches of rain. That still holds, but we're actually seeing another one down here in parts of New Mexico. Same thing, 2 to 4 inches rain. Definitely stay aware for some flash flood warnings if you're within that. Then we have associated marginal surrounding this, then another marginal up here in parts of Montana. So definitely a smaller threat of flash flooding if you're in that marginal risk, only 1 to 2 inches of rain expected, widespread at least, but definitely still want to stay weather aware for potentially some flash flooding warnings. But moving back to our storm environment, this is the expected environment that we could see in front of our storms in that northern plains sector. And this would be for the cluster that's expected to be in front of the cold front. For the cluster behind it, it's likely going to be quite a bit more higher base than all of these ingredients are going to be dumbed down a bit. But for these storms that are at least going to be in front of it, we have a lower cloud base, definitely enough moisture to get these storms going, and then also some pretty decent CAPE values in that 4,000 region. So that's almost extreme levels of CAPE. So definitely severe weather, I think, can be expected up here. And then, of course, it is showing a little bit of a capping inversion here, but because this sounding is taken from a little bit later time on the model, that's just something that normally shows up. These storms would likely get going before this even happens, so that really won't be a factor. We do see some weak wind veering, and then our bulk shear, I think it would be a bit higher than this, so probably closer to 30 knots. So definitely some organized storms. And we have so much CAPE up here near our freezing level, and our mid-level lapse rate isn't that poor either, 7.6 Celsius decreasing per kilometer. And because these storms are going to be discrete, I think we could see some hail in that 2 inch in diameter range. Now for our tornado threat, we actually have a decent bit of shear that is going to be expected. We also have some nice curvature in our hodograph, and our 3 CAPE is really high, nearing 200. So that not only supports general severe weather, but also a small tornado threat for these storms. And for that damaging wind risk, our downdraft CAPE is going to be 1,200, and then we have a precipitable water of 1.51 inches. So some things that could increase the strength of our downdrafts and also will fuel that 60-mile-an-hour damaging wind risk up here in the northern plains. And then moving south to our secondary risk area in the Four Corners states, there's really not that much to it. We have a really high low level lapse rate, definitely enough moisture to see some storms at this elevation, and we have just loads of bulk shear, 54 knots. So definitely the possibility of a couple of organized clusters producing some severe threats. And then we're going to cap today's forecast off with a look at the tropics. It has been really unusually quiet because the peak of hurricane season was only 2 days ago. At that point, we had nothing expected to form out here, but now that has changed rather quickly. We do have a invest, or at least an area of interest that is pushing off the African coastline, which could potentially develop into something in the coming weeks as a 30% chance of development right now. But really, it's not worth guessing where this is going to go because it really hasn't even left the African coast yet. But it's definitely something that we're going to want to watch. And it's just a reminder to stay weather aware on the tropics, as it is about the peak of hurricane season.